Hello. These are the books I read in 2024. This was kind of a bad year for me. Some years are years of plenty, years of abundance. Some are years of illness, years of lassitude, of rancor, skullduggery. I'm not complaining though. I'm laughing. The future is bright. Maybe that's not true. But I feel sanguine. This is the third installment of my year-end book survey video thing. Perhaps it will be my last. Things either come in threes, fives, tens, hundreds, thousands, whatever. I'm not sure I want to do more than three. Mostly making this PowerPoint is just, it takes like 3 days, which is just too long. And I also every year have to figure out once more how to use this video software thing, and it's unpleasant. Every year, my rating system changes. This is a gesture not to be taken seriously, and in fact, is entirely done for laughs. The first year, I believe I did, the book was either good or just okay. Um, Last year, my rating system was passes with distinction, passes, fails. I was doing like a professorial thing. This year, I've decided to go for a more audience-oriented approach, and so from high to low. We have ecstatic raving, enthusiastic cheer, perfectly polite clap. The audience is silent. Boos and jeers. So I guess you could say every year it's become a little bit more complex. Ecstatic raving will be reserved for the dead only. They did a great thing, and now they're gone. We can only hope the same for ourselves. The count. I read 74 books this year. That's much lower than the last few years, where I've on average read well over 100. Reading is one of my favorite things, so it's really not anything beyond that. It's something I do to pass the time. I am a novel reader, like Emma Bovary. I read other things too, to exhaust an numeric portion of this thing. I read 33 novels. Novels are typically the thing I read the most of. And then after that, 17 books of poetry, 4 short story collections, 6 books of philosophy, and 14 books of nonfiction, a genre description I hate. But anyway, enough dalliance. Let's begin. Okay, first book I read was Living and Dying with Marcel Proust by Christopher Prendergast. I didn't finish it, which maybe, augured something for the rest of the year. The year prior, oh Jesus Christ, the year prior in 2023, I read In Search of Lost Time, and so I wanted to read something about it afterward. But as I was reading it, I was just kind of like, I just read like 1,000, no more than 1,000 pages of Proust. Like, do I want to read? So I just put it down. Perfectly polite clap. Next. First novel I read, one of many great novels I read this year, is Log Off by Kristen Felicetti, fellow pressmate. This was published by Shabby Dollhouse. I read it while it was still in manuscript form. And of course, I can give it nothing other but an enthusiastic cheer. At the beginning of this year, I took a Toulouse cinema seminar, like a private seminar over Zoom. Private makes it sound like it was, I don't know, elite and clandestine, but it was just this former academic who is now lives in Ohio. I think he's a farmer, and he was raising funds for his farm by doing this class on Deleuze's cinema books. I loved the seminar. It was wonderful. The books themselves, not so hot. So this is gonna get a audience is silent for me. Okay, next is The Life of Henri Brulard by Stendhal. Actually, my first Stendhal book, and it might be a strange one to have begun with because it's a weird book. It calls itself a novel, but it's clearly just completely autobiography. And Henri Brulard is Stendhal, his name was Henry. I forget. Anyway, I wanted to like this more than I did. There were certainly wonderful moments, but it just didn't appeal as much as I anticipated. So perfectly polite clap. I would recommend it though. Okay, next book is The Event by Sam Pink. I've been a reader of Sam Pink's work since 2011 when Person came out, and I've read almost all of them since then, which is quite a lot of books. I would have to say though that this one was my least favorite. It's a departure from his typical style, which often focuses on the kind of quotidian, everyday um, moments of absurdity, ambiguity, and also warmth. And this was more like social satire or something, and it didn't sit as comfortably with me. So I'm gonna have to give it an audience is silent. But I am looking forward to the next one. I also read In Search of Lost Time by Nicholas Mahler, which is like a graphic novel version of In Search of Lost Time, which of course is kind of silly. It's a graphic novel. Perfectly polite clap. Okay, I read The Cheap Eaters by Thomas Bernhard, which is a kind of minor Bernhard book. I just recently translated for the first time into English, I believe. And even minor Bernhard is great. Very funny. There was this episode about a guy losing his leg or something. I kind of forget it now, but enthusiastic cheer from me certainly. Just great. Okay, next is Things I Have Made of Fiction by Alex Almeida. I have a problem. I read a fair amount of poetry, and many of my friends are poets, and I read poetry because I love them. But I also read it because I like poetry. But I often forget the poems I've read or the books of poems. I remember how I felt generally, but so I feel like a recurring thing in this video is going to be me saying that I liked a book of poems and then just giving it a thumbs up. I will say Oversound has put out chapbooks and other things that I've enjoyed in the past. So, and this is not the first thing I've read from Alexis Almeida. Very good, enthusiastic. I already forget the system. What is it again? I wrote it down. Enthusiastic cheer. 2 thumbs up. Okay, next up is Voyage Around My Room by Javier de Maistre. Although I think he's French, so that's probably not how it's pronounced. I really thought this was going to be up my alley because it's a book written by this man who was arrested after doing an illegal duel, and he was like under house arrest, and so to stave off boredom, he wrote a book, which is why it's called Voyage Around My Room. I thought it was a little middling, to be honest. Didn't really love it. I'll give it a perfectly polite clap, but nothing beyond that. Cinema 2, I've already said how I felt about the first one, and the way I feel about the second one is even worse. I didn't finish it. After about 100 pages, I couldn't submit myself to any more. So this is going to get an audience is silent for me. Okay, my first banger of the year, Confessions of an English Opium Eater by Thomas de Quincey. I genuinely think Thomas de Quincey is one of the best writers of English language prose that I've maybe ever read. Just astonishing, which I know is like a dramatic word, but there's no other word for it. Read Confessions of an English Opium Eater. It's only 80 pages. It's often regarded as the first kind of entry into Western drug literature, addiction literature, maybe, if you will. But honestly, the stuff about him doing heroin or opium, rather, is like the least interesting stuff in the book. The most interesting is just him walking around London having these insane thoughts. I'm really looking forward to reading more Thomas de Quincey. Ecstatic Raving, of course. Senselessness by Horacio Castellanos Moya. I read this book for the first time since I was like 20 or 21. I loved it back then. It's a really wild book. A book in the kind of like underground, notes from the underground kind of man narrator, like losing their sense. And it was every bit as good as I remembered. Just really incredible. Though he's still alive, so we can only give him a enthusiastic cheer. The Ice Storm by John Ashbery. I read this in a Hahnemann edition. These are great little tiny books. They're wonderful, and they're all quite short. So this is more of like a chapbook than like a book proper. And I'm a Ashbery obsessive. Doesn't really stand out in his corpus though, so I'm just gonna give this an enthusiastic cheer. But I love you, John Ashbery, forever. I read Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga I had to read this for my book club, and I didn't really like it, to be honest. I found it rather drab, a little plain, just kind of boring. The writing was just very straightforward. It felt way more commercial than I anticipated it. Yeah, perfectly polite clap, I guess. I don't know. I reread the David Markson note card quartet. And I used to love these books when I was like 24 or something, and I wanted to write something about them, so I reread all four of them, and actually the thing that I wrote is coming out next year with Triangle House. I'm looking forward to it. It's called My Markson. Anyway, as you can anticipate, whenever you revisit art that you loved very much when you were a younger person, you don't like it as much, typically, as an older person. Maybe that's not always true, but that was the case here. My favorite then and now is This Is Not a Novel. So if you're curious about these books at all, this is the one I would recommend. They all pretty much take the same shape, but enthusiastic cheer, sure. Transfer Fat by Asberg. Kind of like an iceberg for your ass. I'm sorry to this poor woman. She probably gets this a lot. I don't know why I read this. I think I just found this book like in a free library or something, and I remember hearing about it years ago. It's an ugly duckling book. Yeah, it's perfectly fine. Perfectly polite clap. Okay, I reread Bartleby and Company by Enrique Villamatas, who is a favorite writer, and this in particular is one of my favorite novels. Like Senselessness, I had not reread it in many, many years, and it was every bit as good as I remember. Still a favorite novel, just delightful. Enthusiastic cheer. Okay, this one is kind of cheating. So I started this last year, and I got about halfway through, or like a third through, and then I finished it this year. It's quite long. It's a biography of Freud, and I don't really cry when I read ever, but I read when I finished this book, I cried. Which sounds ridiculous, but it's a biography that literally ends on its subject's last breath, like the book ends with, and then Freud died. The end, and I cried. Wonderful. There's a little anecdote in this biography about Freud, Jung, and Ferenczi, I believe, and I think that's how you pronounce his name, the Hungarian psychoanalyst. They go to New York, the only time Freud ever went to the United States, and Freud had diarrhea the whole time. And afterward, he said that visiting the United States permanently damaged his handwriting, and would never elaborate as to how or why. But anyway, I want to write about that. I want to write a kind of lightly fictionalized version of this trip. I think that would be quite fun one day. Peter Gay is dead. So ecstatic raving. The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue, a book club pick. I didn't pick it. Awful dog shit. I hated it. Booze and jeers, awful. I Have a Gun by Graham Irving. Irvin, sorry. When I was reading this book, I wish I had a gun so I could put it in my mouth and blow my fucking brains out. Nah, I'm just kidding. Graham is a friend of mine, and he is a poet here in Philadelphia. And I had the delight to see him read from this book when it came out earlier this year. And I appreciate that Graham calls his books case studies as opposed to books of poetry, which I find charming. Enthusiastic cheer, indeed. I read two Adam Phillips books on wanting to change and on getting better, and they're pretty similar, so I can just talk about them as one thing. Adam Phillips is a British psychoanalyst, and he sort of writes kind of like pop psych stuff, but maybe that's a denigrating thing to say. What I mean by pop, it's not for an academic audience, it's for a general audience, and it's typically very what's the word I'm looking for? He has a kind of probing affect to his writing. I really liked both of these books. Both were about essentially how, I'm sort of forgetting. Essentially, like, what does it mean when we're aspirational about ourselves, our personalities, and our place in the world? And so, yeah, enthusiastic cheer. Sure. Okay. I also read Against Nature by Just Kidding Huysman. I've long wanted to read this book. I was a little disappointed that I didn't like it as much as I thought I would. It's a really up my alley in terms of subject matter. The turtle diamond thing, whatever it was. Um, well, I'll never forget that. But I'm gonna just give it a perfectly polite clap. Sorry, just kidding. Okay, The Island by Oscar Datois, also a pressmate. It was published by Shabby Dollhouse this year, and also has a delightful little conceit at the end with respect to translation. I guess I won't spoil it in case you read it. Enthusiastic cheer, but of course. Um, Diary of a String by Mark Francis Johnson. I wish I had a string when I was reading this so I could hang myself. No, I'm just joking. Mark is a friend and also a poet here in Philadelphia. One of my favorite living poets, in fact. I've read many of Mark's books. This is probably like the ninth book of his I've read. He's quite prolific. One thing I love about Mark's writing is that he has incredible titles. All of his books have really remarkable titles. I think Diary of a String is just wonderful. Other favorites include Can of Human Heat and Poor Fridge and How to Flit. Enthusiastic Cheer, but of course. The Life of Tu Fu by Elliot Weinberger. I'm interested in Tu Fu. I like Tu Fu's poetry. I've also read things by Elliot Weinberger that I've enjoyed, so I picked this up. Kind of a puzzling book. I sort of felt like, why does this exist? And then at the end, Elliot Weinberger basically says that this was his pandemic project, and I just that kind of clarified things for me. Has anybody had a single pandemic project that is good or interesting? I don't know. Anyway, the audience is silent. Sorry. Come Back Death by Jennifer Suong. I love this book from Krupskaya. Amazing poetry press. Enthusiastic cheer, but of course. I also loved Hand Me the Limits by Ted Rees, also a friend and dear poet here in Philadelphia. I've also read multiple of Ted's books, and I think this sort of felt like a culmination of Ted's poetic project. I think I'll forever have a soft spot for Thanksgiving. That book is just so fun, but Hand Me the Limits is very special indeed. Enthusiastic cheer, of course. I've long said I don't really like T.S. Eliot. I find him kind of humorless, pompous, overly serious. And my friend Elisa said, you should listen to The Wasteland. Don't read it. And I hadn't read it since I was in high school, so I was working on a very old memory. Anyway, I did what she said. Actually, I listened to rather Alec Guinness of all people read The Wasteland, and he has a very grave way of reading. It was great. I take back my position. I'm still not a huge Eliot person. I also read, or rather listened to, the Four Quartets right after. Look, they get perfectly polite claps from me. I know that's probably sacrilege to some people, but whatever. You can't like everything, so fuck you. Okay, Bitter Water Opera by Nicolette Polek. This was published this year. I'm a big fan of Nicolette's writing. I think she's a very talented fiction writer. I loved her short story collection from a few years ago, and I think I like this novel even more. Enthusiastic cheer. A World of Fragile Things by Mary Rudy. Somebody recommended this to me. Its subtitle apparently is Psychoanalysis and the Art of Living, and I guess that's what it's about. I don't remember. I read this book cover to cover. I don't remember a single thing about it. Perfectly polite clap. The Morning Side by Taya Obret, another book club pick, and I didn't like this one either. I thought it was okay. Not bad, I just wasn't enthusiastic about it, so perfectly polite clap. Another pressmate, Carrie Hunter, All Gabled Roofs Will Fall. This was published by Smooth Friend, which is a San Francisco / Bay Area small arts press. Enthusiastic cheer, I love these poems. I published something with them this year called The Zoo of Thinking. Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, I hit a real hot streak starting here. The Queen's Ball by Kopi is perhaps my favorite book I read this year. Certainly my favorite novel, but I think just my favorite book overall. Unreal, unbelievable, uh, just a totally dazzling, phantasmagoric experience. Read it yesterday, seriously. The Queen's Ball by Kopi, published by Impatient Press, I believe, translated by my friend Kitch Luder, who is going to appear quite a lot on this list, actually. Kopi was an Argentinian writer who I believe mostly lived in France. This was published originally in French in the 1970s, first time in English. Yeah, ecstatic, raving. Any Person is the Only Self by Elisa Gabbert. I thought this was a really lovely essay collection. It has the effect of, the way I've described it to people is sort of like listening to your very smart friend tell you things that are important, but in a kind of friendly and casual way, which might sound like a strange way to compliment a book, but what I mean is that there's a spezzatura. I never can pronounce that word, the Italian word. There's a kind of air of sort of like casualness and yeah, warmth. I guess I think I already said that. But the essays, like Adam Phillips, are very probing, and they're all more or less about reading. And so, yeah, I really love them, and I love this book. Enthusiastic cheer. I finally read Madame Bovary, the Lydia Davis translation, and it was every bit as good as I thought it would be. Just wow, one of the most cynical endings to a novel I've perhaps ever read. I remember in grad school once, my professor at the time, Samuel Delany, who is a famous science fiction writer, he said he loved Flaubert, but he said he could never love this book because he found it misogynistic. And his argument for why it's misogynistic is because he says that Flaubert has nothing but contempt for Emma Bovary. And so, of course, I was thinking that as I was reading the book, and I don't know if that's true. I mean, I you know, Flaubert was a man of the 19th century, so I don't know, his purported misogyny probably would not be surprising. But I actually felt very sympathetic towards Emma. And I had another friend who said the first time they read it, they found it unbelievably depressing, and the second time they read it, they couldn't stop laughing and thought it was more like Don Quixote than anything. And I sort of feel both ways. So, of course, ecstatic raving. And then I read another favorite novel I read this year, We Think the World of You by J.R. Ackerley. I first read My Dog Tulip a few years ago and absolutely fell in love with Ackerley. Such an incredible writer, such a wonderful sensibility. There are just certain phrases that I still remember from this book. Like at a certain point, he describes a dog's ears as, quote, remarkable pink erections. And I just thought, oh man, that's I in particular I like it when writers really pay attention to animals. I think I'm gonna need to read everything that J.R. Ackerley wrote. Ecstatic, Raven, whatever it is, the big one, the good one. Okay, Losing Music by John Cotter. I loved this memoir. John is married to Elisa Gabbert. And in fact, the reason I had long wanted to read this book, it was published, I believe, 2 years ago, and John and Elisa were doing a reading in Philadelphia, and so I wanted to finally get to it. And I'm very happy I did, because probably my favorite memoir I read this year. Tremendously moving. Yeah, it's enthusiastic. Cheer. Thanks, John. I also read Maud Martha by Gwendolyn Brooks, her only novel, certainly a poet's novel, which I know people feel ambivalent about as a term, either because it's just a cliche or, I don't know, that it's sort of like a backhanded compliment or something. But I think it's befitting of this book that has a kind of very sort of image-heavy presence and fragmentary and beautiful. I recommend it. Enthusiastic cheer. I also read Flunker by Dennis Cooper, a short story collection that he published this year. Um, this second story in this collection in particular, I think, is one of the best things that Dennis Cooper has written. Last year, he published I Wished, which I think is a tremendous and extremely beautiful kind of end cap to his George Miles cycle. And I was kind of delighted to see that he published yet another book because he had not published anything for a long time, I think since 2011 when The Marbled Swarm came out. So anyway, Enthusiastic Cheer. Thanks, Dennis. Cold Dogs by Zan DePerry. This is one of my favorite poetry collections I read this year. I got to see Zan read in Philadelphia. Actually, 3 of the people who were on that reading are in this TED Rees. And later on this year, I read books by Thomas DeLahaye. He was there too. But Cold Dogs is great. Zan has a very impressive presence as a reader. So I recommend seeing him if you have a chance to see him read his poetry live. Enthusiastic Cheer. I also finally read Baruch Spinoza's The Ethics, which I'd been wanting to read for years and years and years. And I did it with a philosophy book club. I started a book club with some friends, and it was just an absolutely, I guess I'm using this word a little too much in this video, but an ecstatic experience. The 5th book in particular almost brought me to tears. And I thought had a very convincing argument for how salvation exists and it's on this earth. It goes without saying. Enthusiastic. What is it? Ecstatic cheer. I don't have any tattoos. I've always been a kind of anti-tattoo person, but I would maybe get a line from Spinoza tattooed. Maybe. We'll see. I reread A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr, which I read last year for the first time, and it's one of my favorite novels. Just absolutely wow, unbelievable. And I said to myself, I should reread this every summer. It's a short book, and it takes place in the summer. And I loved it as much as I loved it the first time. I probably will reread it next summer, but maybe then stop. I don't think we shouldn't use up the goodwill of the things we love, you know. But anyway, it goes without saying, enthusiastic or ecstatic. Okay, Short Letter, Long Farewell by Peter Handke was recommended to me. I'd never read Peter Handke. I had wanted to for a long time. I fucking hated this book. I thought it was dog shit terrible. Almost like a cliche of a certain kind of European writer. Booze and jeers. The less said, the better. Comorbidity or The Reckoning by Julia Bencivenga. I thought this was a really lovely collection of poetry, and it ends with a sort of play, which I found extraordinary. Enthusiastic Cheer, certainly. I've read, I think, almost everything that Julia has published, book-wise, and I'm a big fan. Okay, this is maybe my favorite book that was published in 2024. In Search of Lost Time, but every sentence ends with LOL by Andrew Weatherhead. And so it goes, for a long time, I used to go to bed early, LOL. And then every sentence has LOL at the end. It kind of reminded me of the type of work that like Gauss PDF and Troll Thread used to put out like a decade ago. I just think this is absolutely wonderful, hilarious, amazing. I'm actually gonna break my rule because Andrew Weatherhead is alive and a young man. Ecstatic raving. Most of the words are Proust, so that's okay. I read A Little Asylum by Emmanuel Guattari, which is about how Guattari raised his daughter in a lunatic asylum. And you'd think it'd be like, creepy and like, but actually she was like, it was great. I had a great time. The book itself, it was fine. Perfectly polite clap. One of my favorite books I read this year was Aurelia by Gérard de Nerval, which is a sort of autobiographical account of his kind of relationship to dreams and madness. And unfortunately, I believe he killed himself almost immediately after writing it, but it's a totally unbelievable experience. A really wonderful book. Short book, like 60 pages or something. And actually, the book that I'm writing right now takes its epigraph from it. Thanks, Gerard. Ecstatic raving. I also read The Life of Lazarillo de Tormes by Anonymous. It's an anonymous novel from, I believe, the 15th century, so it predates Don Quixote. It's a picaresque. It was fine. It has some charming moments. I mean, it's an old ass book. Yeah, good. Perfectly polite clap. I was gonna say something else about it. Whatever. Amok by Stefan Zweig. I love Stefan Zweig. I read maybe 2 years ago or so a bunch of his novellas, and I in particular loved Burning Secret and Chess Story. Phenomenal. He has a tendency to be a little bit of a pop writer sometimes. Like his plots can be like melodramas or whatever. But those two in particular are just really wonderful. This book, however, Amok, is dog shit, terrible, like one of the worst novels I've ever read. Which it's kind of encouraging. I feel like even someone that you really love can fuck up so bad. Booze and jeers, certainly, but I feel good. I feel good that I hated it. Sucked. Patchwork by Tom Komida, which is coming out next year. I was asked to blurb this book, and so I read it in manuscript form, and I thought I'd read the blurb. Here's what I said. Patchwork is a dazzling performance of assemblage, of découpage, a vertiginous literature of the archive. As with Nature Book, Tom Komida refashions our extant text towards ecstatic and fresh possibilities. There's that word again. A keynote for our time. So obviously, I liked it. Enthusiastic cheer. I wish him the best of luck. 20 Odd Years by Sam Allingham. So this is also a manuscript that I read. It was written by my friend Sam, a novel kind of written in stories. I thought it was absolutely wonderful. I like Sam's writing quite a bit, and this is my favorite thing that he's written. I hope it finds a press, and I hope it finds it soon. It deserves it. There's no cover, so I just pulled a picture from Instagram. It's him looking at a figurine of sorts. Quite confused and maybe a little distressed. I hope he's okay. Happy New Year, Sam. Enthusiastic cheer. I also read Rejection by Tony Tulatmudi. I typically try to avoid very hyped literary fiction because it's almost all of it is terrible. And in 2020, I believe, I took it upon myself to exclusively read, not exclusively, but I read a lot of trendy, popular novels that were published that year, and without exception, they were all awful. And so I said, I'm not reading this stuff anymore. But I saw Tony read in Philadelphia, and it was hilarious. And the Q&A afterwards, I thought was really thoughtful. And so I read it, and I think it's a really great book. Very, very clever, very, very funny. I think he's at his best when he's comedic. And yeah, I recommend it. Enthusiastic cheer. Here's Kit Schluter again, my dear friend Kit, with his short story collection, Cartoons. And in fact, I blurbed it, my second blurb book of the year. And I said, one of the best story collections of this young century, which I know sounds like fulsome praise, but let me tell you, it's really something. There are also some excellent drawings from Kit. Kit designed the cover of my last book, Salmon, and my forthcoming book, Fresh Green Life, which is coming out next year. So a multi-talented man, a translator, a writer, book designer, artist. Wow, he could do it all. Enthusiastic cheer, of course. What else? So after I finished Spinoza with my book club, I decided I want to keep this going. I'm going to keep it going for a year, actually. And so I said I've always wanted to read Anti-Oedipus, and in fact, I tried to read it twice. I made it 50 or 60 pages both times because it's just a pretty difficult book. So I selected Anti-Oedipus, and it was really a wonderful experience because at first I was very enthusiastic, and then about 100 or 150 pages in, I thought, oh my God, I can't believe I have to read the rest of this book. It is fucking torture. And then by the end, it really won me over. I just thought it was such a strange book, certainly an artifact of its time. I don't know if I would recommend it to anybody, but I'm really happy to have read it. So enthusiastic cheer. Thanks, boys. Intermezzo by Sally Rooney, another book club pick. We had real bad luck this year. I'm a fan of Sally Rooney. I'm on her side. I've read all of her novels. I thought this was terrible. I thought this was just a genuinely like bad book, and so fucking long, like 500 pages. There was like nothing redeemable about it, like not one thing. Yeah, bad booze and jeers. My thing is I think every one of her books is worse than the last one. My favorite was the first one. Normal People I liked about as much, but maybe a little less. I mean, it's pop, it's pop fiction, and I think it has its place in the world. But that one that before this, I thought, not so good, and this one's just bad. But I do appreciate Sally Rooney and her advocacy for Gaza and other kind of important political causes that she speaks about quite candidly. So a lot of respect to her. I'll read the next one. Okay. Wuthering Heights, another classic I've always wanted to read, and this book in particular had been actually two people who were just reviewed, I just mentioned them rather. In this book, Mark Johnson and Sam Allingham both have said to me that it's one of their favorite novels ever, and I didn't love it as much as I thought I was going to, which is it's always disappointing when that happens. I did think it was a remarkable book. Don't get me wrong. It gets an enthusiastic cheer from me. It's a little humorless, like it's a little emo. Like the lead singer of My Chemical Romance probably likes this book. It's great though. It's some remarkable and disquieting scenes. I read a short biography of Gilles Deleuze called Critical Lives. I think the series is called Critical Lives that this press does by Frida Beckman. And if anybody asks me, like, oh, where do I start with Deleuze or what should I read about Deleuze? I would say you should read this because it's a wonderful critical portrait of who he was and how Deleuze thought of philosophy as a fundamentally creative project, not a project sort of centered on uncovering, right? But a project that is centered on creating concepts. And also, what I thought was very sweet is how important friendship was to Deleuze. It's a very, very important thing to me too, not just personally, but creatively and philosophically and whatnot. I mean, obviously, he wrote books with Guattari, but also his correspondence with Foucault was very important for many years, although they had a kind of falling out. Anyway, it's short. It's well written. I recommend it. Enthusiastic cheer. I did a kind of similar thing that I did with the Proust book, where I was like, I just read Anti-Oedipus and these other Deleuze books. Let me read an introduction to just sort of see if that like kind of helps clarify some things. And I got about 80 pages in, and I was like, I've just spent so much time reading Deleuze this year. I don't need to read Todd May on it. Although it was perfectly fine, well written, actually probably useful to the students of Deleuze. Enthusiastic cheer. I just didn't want to keep going with it. Okay, I read Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I'm a big Kazuo Ishiguro fan, and I discovered this later in life because I had always thought that he was like a kind of, I don't know, like a corny literary fiction kind of prize-winning writer, like can't possibly be good. And then I read Remains of the Day, and I was like floored by it. I was like, wow, this book's amazing. I also have a soft spot for butlers. Anyway, and since then I've gone and read many of his books. My favorite by a country mile is The Unconsoled, which is I know is sort of controversial or just sort of ambiguously received because it's a kind of a strange book. Ooh, shit, kind of a strange book. I've also I heard Never Let Me Go is sort of his like YA kind of very very commercial book. I didn't actually find it to be the case. I found it kind of boring, kind of. Yeah, I don't know, just a little dull at moments. I had to trudge through it. I didn't hate it. It's my least favorite Ishiguro book, but I thought that it was fine. Perfectly polite clap for me. I read The Thinking About Gladys Machine by Mario Lebrero, who is a Uruguayan writer. I'd read previously Empty Words, which is a sort of kind of quiet novel that I thought was okay. Also translated by Kit Schluter, or co-translated. These stories are really wild and crazy, and I liked it a lot. Enthusiastic cheer. I'm going a little faster now because I'm getting bored of this, and it's 40 minutes. Okay, All My Cats by Bohumil Hrabal. I thought this was just an incredible book. Just wild. No pun intended, because it's about wild cats. Ecstatic raving. That's all I'll say about it. 100 multiple choice questions. This is another John Ashbery chapbook, really. And it's written as the title says, 100 multiple choice questions. Reminded me a little bit of Alejandro Zambra's Multiple Choice, which was not a great book, I thought. Mixed results, but it works in Ashbery's hands. Enthusiastic cheer. Okay, the last wonderful, amazing novel I read this year is A Heart So White by Javier Marias. Every time I read Javier Marias, I say to myself, oh, I think this is like one of my favorite writers. That happened again. And so I need to read him more. This book is just so good. It's great. I think he's one of the best of the late 20th century. Like, he deserves to be up there with, Sebold and Bolaño and Bernhard and, Ecstatic Raving. Rest in peace. Insistence as a Fine Art by Enrique Villamatas, another Hahnemann book, and another Kit Schluter translation. I picked this up because he posted about it, and I stopped by Brickbat Books, which is my favorite bookstore here in Philadelphia, and they had it. Enrique Villamatas really phoned this in. Not a great, perfectly polite clap, whatever. Okay, I read The Return of Inflation by Paul Maddock. It was recommended to me. Money and Capital in the 21st Century, and I thought it was a fairly lucid. At times, it gets in the weeds about like macroeconomics in a way that was slightly confusing because I'm not somebody who's very schooled on those things. But I thought it was a otherwise lucid and helpful book to help understand, the nature of inflation in a contemporary context. So, enthusiastic, clapping, whatever. I read another Peter Handke book because I thought, you know what, I'm going to give him another chance. I hated this book, Sorrow Beyond Dreams. He sucks. His writing sucks. It's like it's either his prose is either extremely plain or just very tin-eared. It's so self-serious. Like, I just can't stand it. Booze and jeers. Wasn't as bad as the other book, which really sucked. This one just sucked a little. Fuck you, Peter Handke. Maybe I'll read him again. I don't know. All right. I also read, I mentioned this previously, 2 books by Thomas DeLahaye, a poet here in Philadelphia. Thomas DeLahaye is not his real name. I read Numeraire and Cahoot Dire Than Weed. Thomas DeLahaye has a very peculiar style. I was going to say anachronistic, which sounds not like a compliment, but I do mean it. I mean, it sounds almost like the prosody reminds me of 18th century English verse or something. I really love both of these books. Enthusiastic cheer. And the very last book I read this year, I try to always end my year with a Thomas Bernhard book because I feel like Bernhard is a kind of wintry author. I read Concrete by Thomas Bernhard, a shorter one. Honestly, not one of my favorites. I'm a big fan, but this one fell a little flat. I liked it. What I thought was very funny was that there's a detail at the very end of this book that is remarkably similar to a detail in my forthcoming book. And I just thought, well, that's silly. Enthusiastic cheer nonetheless. The books of Thomas Bernhard I've read so far in the order I've read them. I want to keep this tradition going. Wittgenstein's Nephew, the first book of his I read, which I also don't really like that much and put me off him for a while. I don't recommend it. It's just okay. Then I read The Voice Imitator, which is a collection of short stories, kind of flash fiction-y, another genre term I hate, but I guess that's what they are. Very funny. And then when I read The Loser, I fell in love proper. And then from there, I've read The Woodcutters, which is the book I recommend to people always. It's his funniest. Old Masters is his maybe second funniest and my personal favorite. I read 3 plays of his, which to be honest are not very good. I read Correction last year, maybe the year before that. No, it was last year. Another favorite, incredible. And then I've already talked about The Cheap Eaters and Concrete. Next year, I'd like to read Gathering Evidence, which is the English language collection of his 5 short memoirs. A friend of mine says that's his favorite. And then I think I have maybe 4 novels. A lot of Bernhard in our futures, folks. Wow. What are my favorite books I read this year? I'm excluding Friends and Contemporaries because those were all my favorites, of course. And I'm excluding rereads. Confessions of an English Opium Eater, as you could probably guess. Freud, A Life of Our Time. The Queen's Ball by Copy, which again, may be my favorite. Madame Bovary, We Think the World of You. Maud Martha. Flunker, I guess Dennis Cooper is a contemporary, but he's more of an elder statesman, you know. So, writer I admire tremendously. Goes without saying. Ethics, life changing? Question mark! Exclamation point. In Search of Lost Time, but every sentence ends with LOL. Also a contemporary, but as I said, most of the words are Proust, so it's okay. Aurelia, Wuthering Heights, the Deleuze mini bio I read. All My Cats, Hearts Are White. Do I have any closing remarks? No. God, this video is so long. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is maybe the last one. Thanks for watching. And maybe next year. I don't know. My throat hurts. I'm not feeling so good right now. Yeah, I had to cancel my New Year's plans because I'm feeling under the weather. Yet again, I was sick like 8 times this year. If you've made it this far, it's crazy. Okay, bye bye.